So we're here at Cowgreen Reservoir and we're parked up to go and visit Weedybank Fell, which is one of the really important sites for the rare plants in Teesdale. It's got a very special kind of habitat here on a type of rock called the sugar limestone, and there are lots of rare plants that grow here and on Cronkley Fell. So the kind of area is quite unusual nationally in having so many rare plants in quite a small area. And we're going to go and survey some of those areas in detail today. So this is Slapestone Syke, one of the sykes on Weedybank Fell, and there is some very rich habitat for the rare species alongside the syke here. There's both kind of the wet habitat and the dry habitat that different rare species prefer one or the other. In both cases, the most interesting areas are really open, so there's lots of gaps in between the plants. And several of the rare plants do well in those conditions. They need lots of light, and they don't compete well with other plants when the vegetation is more closed. So I'm going to survey some of the squares in this area here, carrying on from where I left off before. So the way I plan the survey is I've got a map of the different sites that I need to survey, and back at home on the computer I'll work out which grid squares are in that site, in the whole site. So I'll make a big list of grid squares, which I've got here. And I've got them written down. These are 8-figure grid references, and I'll start at the first one on the list and carry on for as long as I can, and then the next day I'll carry on from where I left off. So I've got my first 8-figure grid reference, and then I'll find where that is using my GPS. I'll know roughly where it is. And now I've got the grid reference at the top so I can check where I am. And because I'm surveying in 10 metre by 10 metre squares, the last 2 digits on the GPS reading need to be 0 on both the top line and the bottom line. So I'll move around until it settles down to 0. We're quite close to it here, but I usually set a row of 10 squares, if there's enough for 10 squares in the site, adjacent to each other. And I'll start the first one, and then I'll go north for the second one and continue north for the row of 10. So when I put the first cane in, I'll check which direction is north with my compass, and I'll walk in that direction. And then I'll check when I get to the next 10 meters on my GPS, stick a cane in, and then carry on till the end of the row. So I've got 2 different colored canes. So I've got white ones and yellow ones. I've experimented with different colors, and some things like blue or green are sometimes hard to see against the background. White seems to be the best color. But the reason I've got 2 colors is because when I'm in the middle of a row of squares, it can be a bit confusing to remember which square I'm in, because I'm looking down at the ground a lot and I need to double check every so often to see where I am. So I put white ones along one side and yellow ones on the other side, and then it helps me not get so disoriented. With the GPS, it's kind of only accurate really to 3 meters. So if I did it again now, it might have changed a little bit, where the exact position of the cane should be. So the idea is that we're trying to map roughly where everything is, knowing that it's not 100% precise, but we know we have a good idea roughly where things are, and we can say how many squares they're in, so we can talk about the extent of the population. So when people are doing this for the first time, they often get a bit worried about where exactly the GPS is settling down, and they might spend a lot of time setting out the canes, but there's kind of no need to do that really. You can just kind of go through it quite quickly, knowing that it's not going to be 100% accurate, but it's kind of accurate enough for our purposes. In this particular habitat, we've got 2 of the main interesting habitats. We've got the sugar limestone grassland and the sugar limestone calcareous flushes. So in the grassland, we could get species like spring gentian, hair sedge, maybe mountain everlasting, alpine bistort, northern bedstraw. These would be some of the main ones. And then in the wetter areas, in the flushes, we'd probably find bird's eye primrose, false sedge was probably here. Alpine rush is likely to be here. It's difficult to identify at this time of year, so most of the time I'll leave the wet areas for later in the summer. I know them all because I've kind of been surveying them for a while, but when I first started I wasn't that familiar with them. So it took me, the first season when I was doing a lot of surveying, I kind of got to know them well then. But I guess the tricky thing about surveying the plants in this job is that because the sheep grazing on here and the vegetation is quite short, you very often don't see many flowers. So you've got to be able to identify the plants just from the vegetative parts. That's the key thing, really, because a lot of the time the flowers get eaten off. They're the first things that the sheep eat, if you like. Normally I'll just walk around and kind of look down from above, but occasionally, every now and then, I'll see something that I'm not 100% sure, is it or isn't it one of the species, and then I'll go down and check it, or I might look at a feature with my hand lens. There's a few species where there's something else you could confuse it with, and you might have to look at a kind of a really small feature. Let's just check the date, 13th of June. And then I'll write in the grid reference for the first square. So because they're all begin with NY, I'll just write the numbers in. So we've got 81, this is going to be 8139 is the easting, and then 3038 is the northing. And sometimes as I do the survey, if I get a few squares in, I might get confused which square I'm in, so I'll go into the middle of the square and I'll check with my GPS just to make sure I'm in the right place. And so in this particular square, a lot of the habitat I can see is not going to be suitable for the rare species probably, so I'll just have a quick walk through this heathery stuff. There might be one or two species that could be possible, but probably not. Yeah. And then on the bits of grassland on the edge, I'll take a little bit more time to look at those. I should be able to spot these species easily if they're here, the ones that might be in this vegetation. There were some plants of common dog violet just down there, and I know that Teesdale violet, which is one of the species we record, is nearby, but it's in a different habitat, so I'm confident I don't even have to look closely at those, that they won't be Teesdale violet. So yeah, in the last square I didn't find any of the species, but it's good that I have a record of it. And in this square we've got some interesting looking calcareous grassland and some of the wet habitat on the edge, and then some unsuitable habitat here as well. So we've got a mixture. I'm going to walk across here and then back. And now I've got down to here, it's more like the wet habitat. So I'm switching to a different set of species in my mind. And here we've got sea plantain. So I'll write that down. That tends to grow in the wetter habitats. So this little thing here, oops, is hair sedge. It's quite an attractive sedge, the way the kind of spikelets droop over like that. And this is typical size for it. And then these little rosettes with the leaves that are very white and flowery on the underside is bird's eye primrose, which was probably in flower a few weeks ago. And then this sedge here, which is all vegetative, is false sedge. It's got these kind of brown bits at the bottom. And when you look around this habitat, you'll see there's a lot of it. Oh, false sedge is very rare nationally, but on Winniebank Fell it's really abundant. There's probably millions of plants here, and sometimes it's the dominant plant in certain types of vegetation. Yeah. This will take me longer, and I can see another species in front of me, Scottish asphodel. This one's in flower, so there's 3 plants of it here. This thing. And in this survey we don't try and estimate how abundant things are. If we see them once in the square, that's enough. So I'm seeing bird's eye primrose and false sedge again, but I've already recorded them, so that's okay. And now I'm moving off the wet area onto the dry grassland again, so I've got to switch back to the other set of species that grow in this habitat in my head. I compile all the data at the end of the year, and once I've got everything in the computer, I'll then produce maps of the different species on a geographical information system, and I'll send the data to the BSBI so that other people have a copy of it as well and is publicly available. I feel quite comfortable about stepping on the plants. I'm not going to go out of my way deliberately to damage something, but a lot of these plants grow in habitats that get a lot of disturbance from sheep grazing, and the sugar limestone is eroding. So a little bit of disturbance is kind of part of what suits them, really. Now, maybe not every botanist would agree with me. Some people get very worried about damage to the habitats, but from my point of view, I feel like these habitats kind of need a little bit of minor damage. And you have to kind of walk over the habitats in order to see what's there as well, so it's a necessary thing to do. And I'm only doing it once. It's not like I'm walking on the same area every day. That would be, more damaging. Most of the time when I do it, I'm by myself. We have had people come out in teams sometimes. Because I do a lot of it, I'm quite quick at it now. And like what I've just demonstrated there, like a new person would take much, much longer to do it because they would be unsure of things and they'd need to stop and check, and that would be appropriate for them. But because I know the habitats so well now and the species as well, I'm kind of, the speed I do it gives a false impression of what it would be like for somebody else, I think. Yeah. When I'm doing this work by myself, I guess the most important health and safety issue is to make sure that I tell somebody where I'm going. So I've got a system, a buddy system, where I tell someone where I'm going every day and what time I expect to finish. And I need to confirm with them when I'm finished, otherwise they'll call 999 and then the helicopters will come out to look for me. So I do that every day. And that's particularly important because these areas I work in are quite remote, and even if something simple happened, like I sprained my ankle, I might be several miles from a road, so it could be quite dangerous if I didn't do that. Apart from that, obviously you need protection against the weather, and up here you can get all sorts of weather, like it's quite warm today, so I need to have sunblock and a hat and water. I bring 2 bottles of 1.5 litres of water with me every time in warm weather. If I know that I'm very thirsty and drinking a lot of water and I run out, I'll just stop working at 2 or 3 o'clock because it can be quite dangerous to carry on. You need protection against cold and the rain. It can be really cold and wet here in the middle of summer. So it's good to check the weather forecast as well, but always come prepared for something unexpected. I tend to cover everything up to protect myself from the sun and from insect bites. It can be quite midgy here if the wind is not blowing, which doesn't happen that often, but it can be a bit horrible when it does happen. And because I work outside a lot, I always tuck my trousers into my socks to, prevent ticks. This particular area isn't known for ticks, but I just do it every time because I work outdoors a lot. In a way, it can be a little bit of a curse knowing all the plants because it's hard for me to go for a walk in the countryside and not look at them, it's hard for me to go for a walk and just enjoy the view because I get distracted by the plants along the way. And I'm looking down all the time as well, there might be really interesting birds flying overhead that I will never see.